Welcome back to another story from Philip J. Bradbury. And this one is about how the novel Scars Can't Tell came about. So the title kind of came about one day when I was in Ipswich and I'd just been working outside around the house, concreting or something, and then sat down with a coffee. I was sweating all over and I noticed a scar that I had on my leg from a motorcycle accident. It wasn't sweating. Everything else on my body was sweating, but the scar wasn't. It was just dry around it. And for some reason this intrigued me, the idea that scars don't sweat. And immediately it occurred to me that that's a really good title for a novel, Scars Don't Sweat. And so I started writing that novel. And away it went, as usual, without my deciding how it was going. Then after about 6 months, I think, another story kind of crept in sideways, if you like, to the story, and I thought, this is getting way too complicated. I had these two unconnected but sort of connected stories going on, and my mind or my pen or whatever it was really wanted to get on with writing the second one. So eventually I caved in and said, okay, you guys, whoever's doing this writing, I'll do whatever. And so away this went. So Scars Can't Tell was originally going, well, it never actually had a plan. So originally Scars Don't Sweat was going to be a story. So that has now become the second in a trilogy, and Scars Can't Tell is now the first, which has been published. And a lot of it has come from my own experience. So in 1994, after my marriage broke down, I was running an accounting business that I didn't like and wasn't doing very well, and I just needed time out. I also had this strange urge, as a New Zealander, I guess, to spend time with the Aborigines. There was no explanation for this, I just wanted to do that. And so I took my son, it happened to be in the holidays, I took him off. He was about 12, and he and I had an amazing holiday in Australia. We did thousands of miles, and then he went back to school. I carried on, and the whole story of how I ended up in Alice Springs is another story, which I'll put on later. So I ended up in Alice Springs, and then I ended up working on a resort, if you like, a very rustic resort, about an hour east of Alice Springs, and I was running horse tricks, camel tricks, and showing people how to crack stock whips and make billy tea and damper and all that sort of cowboy Australian stuff. So while I was there, this Aboriginal guy, middle-aged, Jimmy, turned up, and he, I don't know how you put it, but he just took a shine to me, and I won't explain how that happened because that will be in the next video. And he showed me he took me on trips around and through the bush or the desert, showing me lots of Aboriginal stuff, healing, how to go invisible, and all sorts of things. So anyway, Jimmy's in the story. I've turned him into an old man with a white beard. He's actually a young man, youngish. And so while I was there, and I don't know how this happens, but people kept coming to me with information that seemed really, really bizarre, and I was initially skeptical. So the stories that kept coming were that, one, there was a massive underground tunnel that went from Alice Springs out to the Pine Gap American military base, which is about half an hour's drive from Alice Springs. And the second part of the story was that children were being stolen, and this is not part of the stolen generation story. This is a totally different story, let's say, different group of activities which is still going on today. And so particularly Aboriginal children, but children were being stolen. Somehow this huge tunnel, they now call them DUMS, Deep Underground Military bases, and they were being used somehow, and children were being stolen, and then they were being transported to other places to be used for all sorts of things, from extracting adrenochrome, for slavery, for sex, for all sorts of... And I absolutely just thought the whole thing was fantasy anyway. But the fact that humans would do such a thing, or such things, there were many things, to other humans, I just could not get my head around it. However, these stories just kept going. And then from 2014 to 2017, it would have been, I lived in Ipswich, which is in Queensland, and again these similar stories came up, and one of them was that there was another massive tunnel, a deep underground military base, that actually went from Ipswich out to Brisbane, and apparently there's lots of these, particularly going out to port cities, Melbourne, Adelaide, Darwin, and so on. So I will say right now, I've never seen any of these, I've never been there, and I have never seen children being transported, moved about, abused, or anything. I've simply heard these stories, and I've heard them from so many places, and not just from Australia, but from around the world. And so apparently there's these DUMs around the world. So that's kind of been in the novel, as part of the novel. The other thing that happened while I was in Ipswich was that I was a member of the U3A and was running courses and doing all sorts of, let's say, civic things. Got to meet the mayor at the time, Paul Pasali, and he was a nice chap, if you like, on the outside, but it was discovered that he was otherwise and he eventually was arrested and jailed for 7 different crimes, and along with some of his other cronies, some councillors and other people. And then the council was closed down because of corruption was just rife through the whole council in all sorts of ways, and all sorts of things to do with money, to do with prostitution, all sorts of things. And so I kind of knew about a lot of that was going on, and of course it was in the newspapers. It's public knowledge, and everybody was talking about it, and everybody in Ipswich and that knew about what was going on. So I've kind of used that as well. So all of those kind of got thrown in. My experience with the Aborigines, my experience, or the stories, if you like, about children particularly, and then about corruption. And the same thing happened with the Logan Council. A lot of corruption there. That Logan's part of Brisbane, and that council was closed down. So there's been a lot of corruption right from the Joh Bjelke-Petersen era of the 1980s, and apparently it's supposed to have been cleaned up, but it appears that nothing has actually been done. We've had lots of sort of commissions and things like that. So that is all of those, if you like, experiences have kind of fallen into the book, along with a love story that started out as a very unloved story, and then we know how love stories go. They become loving and then not, and then loving, and so on. And so that is how that story came about, just events in my life. And they just kind of coagulate in their own strange way from different eras, totally different subjects, and yet it all fits together in an amazing, I think, a brilliant story. So that, people, is how Scars Can't Tell came about. So those were the tangible events that have been included in the story, and the themes, if you like, are mainly about abuse and the way we deal with things that happen in our lives. So I was abused as a child in different ways. I was diagnosed with PTSD, And so I've experienced some of that, and I was also running personal development courses and running men's groups, and also being a life coach, have helped a lot of people deal with abuse and bullying and all sorts of trauma, if you like, that happens in our lives. So that's one of the themes, if you like, that runs through the book as well. This, how do we deal with it, and what's a way to change our life despite the stuff that's going on, or step above it. And so there's some very practical lessons, if you like, through the book. So you'll learn some Australian history, and you will find ways to step into your power and step beyond whatever past events have happened in your life. And you'll have a damn good read, and I know you'll enjoy it. Scars Can't Tell. Thank you.